You've spent your whole adult life believing I owed you a secure place in this family and in this gated community. Rebecca, my father, said, his voice low and edged with something colder than anger as he leaned across the kitchen island in our home. I kept promising you that future a share of the asset's stability once things settled, but that promise never existed the way you thought it did. Your stepmother and I have been juggling those fabricated financial excuses for years just to keep the books from falling apart around you. Those altered medical records we showed you last month, they were the only way to explain why the support was drying up. And now the truth is catching up, so face it, you were never going to get what I led you to believe was waiting for you. Hi, my name is Rebecca Langford. I am 31 years old. That confrontation in our kitchen hit me like a wave I couldn't swim out of. I stood there gripping the edge of the counter, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, the kind of vulnerable ache that makes your eyes sting even when you're trying not to cry. My father had always been the one who set the rules in our high-end gated neighborhood outside Scottsdale, Arizona, the man everyone respected for his quiet authority and careful planning. He and my stepmother had raised me here since I was a teenager, after my biological mother passed away young, and for most of my life, I had believed their stories about how they were building something lasting for all of us. But that evening, with the Arizona sun dipping low and casting long shadows across the tile floor, his words cracked open everything I thought I knew about my place in the family. I had come over after work, still in my blouse from my job as a healthcare administrator at the local clinic, expecting a calm discussion about the family trust documents he had mentioned needing my signature on. Instead, I got this. My stepmother stood just behind him, arms crossed her expression, a careful mix of concern and something sharper I couldn't quite name yet. She had always been the one who smoothed things over with gentle reminders about how expensive life was in our neighborhood, the HOA fees, the property upkeep, the way my father's investments had been stretched thin lately. I had trusted her explanations for why my promised share of the family assets kept getting delayed. The next morning, I woke up in my own townhouse, a few streets over in the same gated community, the kind of place that felt safe and familiar until it suddenly didn't. My hands were still shaking as I made coffee, replaying his words. I'd spent years putting my own life on hold, turning down better job offers in the city, because my father kept saying the family business interests needed me close, and that my future was tied to the properties we owned here. Those promises had shaped every decision I made, staying local, helping with medical paperwork, when my stepmother said the family doctor needed extra records to protect our assets, even delaying my own plans to buy a place outright. Now it felt like every excuse had been a thread holding together a story that was never real. I tried to push through the day at the clinic, scheduling patient follow-ups and reviewing charts, but the vulnerability sat heavy in my chest. My colleague Hannah Brooks noticed right away during our lunch break in the staff lounge. Hannah was the one person I could talk to, without filtering everything. She had become a close friend over the last couple of years, someone who listened without judgment. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said gently, sliding a coffee across the table. I told her a little, just enough about the argument, and she frowned. "That sounds like more than just money talk, Rebecca. You deserve straight answers." Her words gave me the smallest bit of steadiness, but the unease lingered. That evening, my stepmother texted me asking me to stop by again. I went heart heavy with that emotional pull of wanting to believe there was still a way to fix things. She met me at the door with a tired smile and led me to the living room where my father was already waiting with a folder of papers. "We need to clear the air about the financial side," she said softly, but her eyes flicked to him in a way that made my stomach twist. They started going over the same excuses again. The market dips, the unexpected medical costs from old family records that had to be updated for insurance purposes, the way my role in the family wasn't quite what we had budgeted for. I sat there listening, feeling smaller with every sentence, the kind of quiet heartbreak that makes you question your own memories. Then 2 days later, the first crack appeared. Hannah called me at work, voice urgent but low. "I don't know how to say this, but I think you need to see something." One of the clinic's IT guys forwarded me an email chain that got accidentally shared in the staff group. Your name came up, and it looks like it's from your stepmother's account. Something about medical records and family finances. My pulse spiked. I asked her to send it over, and when I opened the attachment in a quiet corner of the break room, the words blurred for a second. The emails were between my stepmother and my father, dated months apart, discussing how to handle Rebecca's expectations by altering some old medical notes to show ongoing health concerns that justified holding back on the promised asset transfers. They talked about the promised future as a tool to keep me compliant, never intending to follow through once I turned 31 and the trust terms shifted. I sat there staring at my phone, a fresh wave of vulnerability washing over me that made my eyes burn. This wasn't just financial tight-fistedness, it was deliberate. My stepmother had been the one pushing the altered records through a contact at the family doctor's office, fabricating excuses about why the money for my future home upgrade or business stake kept getting pushed back. My father had signed off on every delay. The email showed them agreeing it was better for everyone if I stayed dependent a little longer. The betrayal felt personal in a way that left me raw, like the ground under my feet in this gated neighborhood I had called home was suddenly shifting. I didn't confront them right away. Instead, I drove home through the quiet, palm-lined streets of the community, the emotional weight pressing on my chest as I parked in my driveway. I needed time to breathe, to let the hurt settle into something I could use. But the next morning, my father called early, his tone clipped. "We heard you might have seen some correspondence. Let's talk before this gets blown out of proportion." My stepmother's voice was in the background, softer but insistent, reminding me how much they had sacrificed to keep the family intact. I agreed to meet them later that day at their house, my hands trembling as I hung up. The suspense of what might come next hung in the air like the desert heat outside. Later that afternoon, I drove the short distance through our gated neighborhood's winding streets, lined with palm trees and perfectly manicured lawns, my stomach in knots the whole way. I had agreed to the meeting because part of me still hoped there was some misunderstanding, some way the emails Hannah had shown me could be explained away as a simple mix-up rather than the deliberate manipulation they read like. When I stepped inside the familiar entryway of my father and stepmother's home, Thomas Langford was already seated at the long dining table with a stack of folders in front of him, his expression tight with that quiet authority he always carried. Elena Langford stood beside him, her arms folded, offering me a small, careful smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Rebecca, sit down," my father said right away, gesturing to the chair across from him without any of the usual warmth. "We need to talk about these so-called emails you apparently stumbled across. Your stepmother and I have been carrying the weight of this family's future for a long time, and it's time you understood the real picture instead of chasing shadows." His voice stayed low, but there was a sharp edge beneath it, the kind that made my chest tighten with that familiar vulnerable ache I had felt since I was a teenager, trying to earn his approval. I sat clutching my purse in my lap like a shield and waited for him to continue. Elena Langford pulled out the chair next to him and leaned forward slightly. "Sweetheart." Those messages were taken completely out of context. She said, her tone soft, but laced with the same practiced patience she used whenever she explained why another promised transfer from the family assets had to be delayed. "We've had to make some tough calls with the medical records over the years, nothing dishonest, just adjustments to protect everyone's stability in this neighborhood. The doctors we worked with understood that. You've always been so sensitive about these things, and we didn't want to burden you with the full financial strain." My father nodded, flipping open one of the folders to reveal copies of old medical forms I recognized from years ago, forms I'd helped gather when Elena Langford told me the family needed them for insurance and estate planning. "Exactly," he continued, his eyes locking onto mine with that cold, unyielding look. "You've spent your whole adult life believing there was this secure future waiting for you here in the community property, shares a stake in the investments, the kind of stability we kept promising. But the truth is that promised future never existed the way we let you believe it did. We used those fabricated financial excuses because the assets were stretched thinner than you knew, and those altered medical records were the only way to keep the support structure from collapsing around you. The words landed like a slow, heavy weight on my heart. I felt my throat close up, the emotional sting making my eyes burn as I stared at the papers. This wasn't just about money. It was about every late night conversation where he had sat me down and told me to stay close to keep my job at the clinic instead of taking that better offer in Phoenix, because the family needs you here, Rebecca. Your future is tied to ours. I had believed him. I had turned down promotions, delayed my own plans for a bigger place, even helped coordinate those medical appointments, thinking I was contributing to something real. Now it felt like every reassurance had been a carefully constructed lie to keep me dependent and compliant. I don't understand. I said, my voice quieter than I wanted it to be, the vulnerability slipping through, despite how hard I tried to hold it steady. You kept telling me the delays were temporary, that once the records were sorted, the trust would release what you promised. Why would you change medical documents just to string me along? Elena Langford reached across the table as if to touch my hand, but I pulled back instinctively. Because we were protecting you, Rebecca, she replied, her voice dropping into that gentle, almost pitying tone that always made me feel small. The market has been brutal, and your father's health concerns, those adjusted records, helped secure better coverage for all of us. We couldn't risk you panicking and making rash decisions that would hurt the whole family. You've always been the one who needed that extra guidance. My father leaned back, his fingers tapping the folder with a rhythmic impatience that set my nerves on edge. And now you're turning this into some big betrayal because of a few leaked emails. We've given you a roof connections in this gated community, opportunities most people your age would kill for. But if you keep pushing, Rebecca, you're going to find out just how quickly that support can disappear. The neighbors talk, the HOA board listens, and none of us wants you isolated here because of your own stubbornness. The psychological jab hit deep, reminding me how much my social circle, my sense of belonging in this neighborhood, had always been tied to their approval. I felt the familiar heartbreak rising again, the kind that made my hands shake under the table. I left the meeting an hour later with my head spinning the Arizona evening air, feeling heavier than usual as I walked to my car. The conversation had only confirmed what the emails hinted at: years of deliberate delays masked as financial caution, all while using altered medical records to justify holding back on the assets they had dangled in front of me like a carrot. My father's final words still echoed. That promised future had never been real, just a tool to keep me in line. The betrayal felt so personal, so raw, that I pulled over a few blocks from my own townhouse and let myself cry for a minute, the tears hot against my cheeks. That night, I couldn't sleep, so I called Hannah Brooks again. She listened patiently while I recounted the meeting, her voice steady on the other end of the line. Rebecca, this goes beyond family drama. You need real advice from someone who isn't tied to them. She suggested I reach out to David Ramirez, a trusted attorney who lived a few streets over in the same gated community and had helped several of our clinic staff with estate matters in the past. David was one of those quiet, reliable people everyone turned to when things got complicated, someone I had met at neighborhood events, but never thought I would need professionally. I texted him the next morning, and he agreed to meet me for coffee at a small cafe just outside the gates that afternoon. David Ramirez turned out to be exactly the calm presence I needed. We sat at an outdoor table under a shaded umbrella, and I slid my phone across to him, with the forwarded email chain open. His brow furrowed as he scrolled, and after a few minutes he looked up at me with genuine concern. "These aren't just casual notes, Rebecca," he said, keeping his voice low. "The way they reference the altered medical records and the fabricated excuses about the trust assets. It suggests they were intentionally misleading you to maintain control. I can help you request the original unedited files from the doctor's office and review any trust documents you have access to. But you have to be prepared. This could get messy if your father decides to push back." His words gave me a small anchor of steadiness amid the emotional storm, but the vulnerability lingered. I thanked him and drove back to the clinic, where Dr. Marcus Hale, my supervisor and longtime mentor, noticed my distraction during our afternoon staff meeting. Dr. Hale had always been fair and supportive, the kind of boss who remembered personal details and offered quiet encouragement. When the meeting ended, he pulled me aside in the hallway. "Everything okay? You seem off today." I gave him the briefest outline, and he nodded thoughtfully. "Families can be complicated. If you need time or resources to sort this, the clinic has your back. Just don't let it affect your focus here. We value you." His kindness felt like a small lifeline, a reminder that not every relationship in my life was built on conditions. The following day, the tension escalated again when my father called me at work, his voice clipped and demanding. "Rebecca, I heard you were meeting with David Ramirez yesterday. This needs to stop. We've built a life for you in this community, and dragging outsiders into private family matters is only going to embarrass everyone. Those emails don't change the fact that we've always had your best interests at heart, even if the promised support had to be adjusted for real financial reasons." The sarcasm in his tone was unmistakable, now laced with the long-held resentment that I was questioning his authority. Elena Langford's voice came through on speaker in the background, adding softly but firmly, "We're still your family, sweetheart. Don't throw that away over a misunderstanding." I hung up feeling more exposed than ever, the emotional weight pressing down as I tried to finish my shift. Later that evening, while reviewing some old trust summaries, David had asked me to gather another email notification. Popped up on my phone, this one forwarded accidentally from a shared family account I still had access to. It was newer dated just last week, and it detailed how my father and stepmother had discussed using the altered medical records one final time to delay any asset release until after my 31st birthday, explicitly stating that the promised future had always been a placeholder to keep me close and contributing without ever intending full delivery. The words blurred as fresh hurt washed over me, but beneath it something firmer was starting to take root, a quiet resolve not to keep swallowing their excuses. Before I could even process the new email fully, my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered cautiously, and a calm professional voice on the other end introduced herself as Sarah Klein, a probate attorney who had been contacted by someone connected to an old family matter involving my biological mother's side of the family. "Miss Langford, I apologize for the abrupt call, but records have recently surfaced that may affect your standing in certain estate matters. It appears there's more to your family's financial history than what you've been told, and it involves a potential claim that could change everything about the assets your father has been managing." My heart stuttered in my chest, the vulnerability from the past few days mixing with a sudden spike of suspense that left me gripping the phone tighter. What did this mean? Had the emails only been the surface of a much deeper deception? I told Sarah I would call her back first thing in the morning, but as I ended the call, the questions swirled questions that made the ground beneath my life in this gated neighborhood feel even more unsteady than before. The unknown number call from Sarah Klein left me sitting in my townhouse living room long after the sun had set over the gated neighborhood, the quiet hum of the air conditioning, the only sound as I replayed her words in my mind. I barely slept that night. The vulnerability from the leaked emails and my father's cold explanations mixing with this new thread of uncertainty that made my chest feel tight every time I thought about what changing everything could mean. The next morning, I called her back, as promised, my voice steadier than I felt, and we arranged to meet at her office downtown later that day. I took the morning off from the clinic, telling Dr. Marcus Hale I needed some personal time. He offered quiet understanding without pressing for details, which only reminded me how much support existed outside the walls of my family's carefully constructed story. Sarah Klein's office was a calm, professional space, with soft lighting and neat stacks of files that felt worlds away from the emotional weight pressing on me. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a kind but serious expression, gesturing for me to sit across from her desk. "Rebecca, thank you for coming so quickly," she said, sliding a folder toward me. "What I'm about to share came through probate channels connected to your biological mother's estate records, things your father and stepmother appear to have kept hidden or delayed for years. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the folder, the pages blurring for a moment before her next words hit. There's a true heir who has recently surfaced. A half brother from your mother's side named Lucas Whitaker, who was born before your parents' marriage and whose existence was never disclosed to you. He reached out after discovering old documents, and his claim has triggered a full review of the family assets your father has been managing. The revelation landed like a quiet earthquake inside me. Lucas Whitaker, the true heir, had provided evidence through Sarah that my father had used fabricated financial excuses for over a decade to control and divert portions of the estate that should have been protected for all legitimate heirs, including me. The altered medical records weren't just about insurance. They had been part of a larger pattern to justify delays and exclusions, keeping me dependent while the promised future I had clung to was never intended to materialize the way I believed. Sarah explained that Lucas's emergence had forced transparency, and while it didn't erase the years of manipulation, it gave me legal standing to claim my own independent share without relying on my father's version of events. You don't have to fight for scraps anymore, she said gently. But this also means the family dynamic you've known is likely over. The choice is yours, how far you want to push. I sat there feeling the raw sting of it all, the emotional vulnerability that had built since that kitchen confrontation, now layered with this unexpected truth. Part of me wanted to rage at how my father had woven those lies so seamlessly, using my stepmother's softer words to make the delays feel like love. But another part, quieter and steadier, recognized this as the moment I had been waiting for without knowing it. I thanked Sarah and asked her to proceed with the necessary filings for my portion, then drove back through the familiar gates of the neighborhood, with tears slipping down my cheeks. The palm-lined streets that had once felt like home now carried the ache of what I was about to lose. That evening, I drove straight to my father and stepmother's house, the Arizona dusk painting everything in soft oranges and pinks that did nothing to ease the knot in my stomach. They were both in the living room when I arrived, unannounced, my father pacing with his usual authoritative stride, and my stepmother perched on the edge of the couch, looking concerned. "Rebecca, what's this about?" my father asked immediately, his tone carrying that mix of impatience and hidden contempt I had come to recognize. "We thought we made ourselves clear yesterday. Dragging lawyers into this is only going to make things worse for everyone." I stood in the doorway, heart pounding but voice calm despite the vulnerability threatening to spill over. "I met with Sarah Klein today." I said, the words coming out steadier than I expected. "She told me about Lucas Whitaker, the true heir who surfaced, the one whose existence you both kept from me while using altered medical records and fabricated excuses to string me along about a promised future that never existed." My stepmother's face paled, and she glanced quickly at my father, who stopped pacing and stared at me with narrowed eyes. "You have no idea what you're talking about," my father said, his voice low and edged with sarcasm that cut deep. "That boy was a complication we handled years ago to protect the family you're part of. We gave you a life here in this neighborhood, stability, opportunities, everything built on decisions you were too young to understand. If you side with some stranger over us now, after everything, you'll be the one who ends up alone." The psychological jab landed exactly where it always did, reminding me of every time he had made my belonging feel conditional, but this time it didn't break me the way it once would have. The emails, the records, the sudden appearance of the true heir, it all wove together into a picture too clear to ignore. My stepmother stood then, reaching out as if to hug me, her voice soft and pleading in that way that used to make me doubt myself. "Sweetheart, we did what we thought was best. The financial pressures were real, and those adjustments kept the peace for all of us. Don't let this tear apart what we have left." But I stepped back, the emotional weight of her words mixing with a firm resolve that felt new and fragile at the same time. I told them I had already instructed Sarah to secure my independent claim and that I would no longer be participating in family decisions or gatherings. "I'm choosing myself," I said quietly, the words carrying the quiet triumph of someone who had finally seen the full ledger. The promised future you kept dangling was never real, and I'm done paying for it with my peace. My father's face hardened further, but he didn't argue the way I expected, maybe because the true heir's emergence had already shifted the power in ways he couldn't control anymore. You'll regret this, Rebecca, he said, the resentment clear in his tone. This neighborhood, these connections, they don't forget easily. My stepmother looked genuinely stricken, tears welling as she whispered that I was family, but I felt the irreversible loss settle in my chest like a heavy but necessary truth. The family gatherings that had once defined my world would end here, the ties I had clung to for 31 years, dissolving in the space of one honest conversation. It hurt in a deep, vulnerable way that made my throat tight, but beneath it was the steady inner triumph of knowing I had finally stepped out from under their fabricated story. I left their house that night without looking back, driving the short distance to my townhouse under the quiet desert stars. In the weeks that followed, the process with Sarah Klein moved forward. Lucas Whitaker and I even spoke briefly on a call. He initiated a kind but distant conversation where he shared enough to confirm the deceptions without demanding anything from me. I secured a modest but independent portion of what was rightfully mine, enough to feel secure without tying my future to the gated community anymore. Hannah Brooks and Dr. Marcus Hale became even closer supports, helping me navigate the emotional aftermath with lunches and quiet check-ins that reminded me I wasn't starting over alone. David Ramirez handled the legal details with steady professionalism, and in time I even found a new rental just outside the gates, a fresh start that felt both liberating and lonely. The family gatherings did end just as my father had warned. There were no more invitations, no more shared holidays or neighborhood events where I was expected to smile through the tension. My father and stepmother kept their distance, the silence between us a final quiet closure that carried its own ache. I missed the illusion of belonging sometimes, especially on quiet evenings when the vulnerability crept back in, but I never regretted the choice. Self-respect comes first. I learned the hard way through every fabricated excuse and altered record that had kept me small. It meant walking away empowered, even if it meant losing the only family I had known, because silence had protected my heart long enough. The promised future was never real, but the one I chose for myself finally was. I sat on my new balcony one evening, months later, the city lights of Scottsdale twinkling in the distance, and felt that steady inner triumph settle into something peaceful. The betrayal had stripped away the lies, but it had also freed me to build something honest. I picked up my phone and opened a note to myself, typing out the lesson that had carried me through. Self-respect isn't loud or dramatic. It's the quiet decision to stop accepting less than you deserve, even when it costs you everything familiar. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but saying it out loud helped me see how far I've come. Would you choose yourself over a promised future that turned out to be built on nothing but excuses and hidden truths, even if it meant walking away from the only family you've ever known?